Okay, we're back. Allman Brothers at Fillmore East, July of 1971. Matt, where does this fall in the rankings?
So this is 97 and best ever albums of the 70s, and comes in at number 19 in 1971, number 383 of all time, and Rolling Stone thinks very highly of this record as it comes in at number 105 in the Rolling Stone Top 500 list. So almost in the top 100, and it's the highest. It's not the highest. It's the second highest rated album that we're covering tonight from Rolling Stone.
Wow, thank you for that. I'm almost as surprised as Rod Stewart being on that list, as it being so high.
It's also the highest, and it's the highest rated album on best ever albums for the Allman Brothers.
Josh loves to give those tells, doesn't he?
He sure does. He sure does. I do not want to be a poker partner with Josh.
I don't play poker, so I don't have to worry about that.
That's probably a good thing for your wife.
Yep. Okay, Allman Brothers were formed in Jacksonville, Florida. The founding members who we're talking about today are Duane Allman, Greg Allman, Dickie Betts, Barry Oakley, Butch Trucks, and Johnny Jimo Johnson. Johansson.
Johnny Jimo Johnson?
Yeah, his nickname was Jimo. So, yep. Johnny
That's amazing.
Johansson. Johansson. They had... Before they officially formed as the Allman Brothers in 1969, the path getting to that point for each band member varied. Greg and Duane formed a band called the Escorts in the mid-'60s, which then became the Allman Joys, which is a pretty funny pun.
So's the Escorts, though.
Yeah. Then they were changed their name to Hourglass when they got a record deal with a small label called Liberty Records, and they made 2 unsuccessful albums for them. Duane then decided he wanted to become a session musician and went to Muscle Shoals in Alabama and played for that group in Fame Studios there. Duane was successful there and worked with people like Aretha Franklin and King Curtis. I think we might have mentioned him when we were talking about Aretha at one point. And then Duane started pulling in different musicians together to form a new group while he was there. This is where he met Jimo, who plays drums, and recruited bassist Barry Oakley from a time he met him earlier in Georgia. Duane's vision for the band was 2 lead guitarists and 2 drummers, which is what the Allman Brothers ended up consisting of. Phil Walden, who was the manager of the late Otis Redding, was looking to expand into rock music and rock acts, and then Rick Hall was the manager of Fame Studios down in Alabama, and he was unsatisfied with Duane and the other musicians there, and so he offered the contract for them to Walden and Jerry Wexler at Atlantic for $10,000, which they bought up.
Wow.
They were to be, according to Phil Walden, to be the centerpiece of his new label Capricorn, which was going to be distributed by Atlantic. Duane and Jimo then moved to Jacksonville, and Dickie Betts and Butch Trucks joined up there as well.
That is an astounding run of names, by the way, right there. Could we run those names again so we can hear that? So,
sure.
Yeah.
Dickie Betts, Butch Trucks. You got Jimo Johansson.
Yep.
They're
that's an all-star cast right there.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
And Dickie Betts plays the other lead guitar next to Duane Allman, who's also lead guitar and slide guitar, and Butch Trucks plays drums in addition to Jimo. So then they started practicing when they were in Jacksonville together, and they debuted as the Allman Brothers at the Jacksonville Armory March 30th, 1969. The band then moved to Macon, Georgia in May of that year, 69, and lived in an apartment nicknamed the Hippie Crash Pad. And their first performance outside of the South came on May 30th and 31st of that year, where they opened for Velvet Underground in Boston. So quite a different different acts there for
eclectic.
Yep.
Yeah.
Needing more material, they refashioned old blues numbers and created improvisational jam sessions, as you hear on this album. Greg Allman at this time also became the sole songwriter for the band. Their first album was recorded in New York City at Atlantic and released in November of 1969. However, that album sold poorly, and record execs wanted them to move to LA or New York City to become more like other bands. And Trucks recalls, quote, they wanted us to act like a rock band, and we just told them to go fuck themselves, remembered Trucks. So
fair enough.
They ended up staying in Macon and not going either of those places. They rented a farmhouse on a lake outside of Macon, and with so many people coming and going, they said it reminded them of Idlewild Airport in New York City, which is now known as JFK Airport. And the house became nicknamed Idlewild South, and that is also the name of their second album, Idlewild South, which came out in September of 1970. Despite a growing reputation of the band, the album only sold slightly better than the first album, so they hadn't really hit success yet. Shortly after this, Duane was put in touch with Eric Clapton by producer Tom Dowd, who produced their first two albums and who we've mentioned before on the podcast, and they became, quote, instant soulmates. And then Clapton invited him to join Derek and the Dominoes, which he considered, but then he turned it down and came back to the Allman Brothers. Over the course of 1971, they started making more money and realized that the audience was a big part of their appeal and the live dynamic between the two of them, the band and the audience. And that's when the idea for this live album came about. It is recorded over 3 nights, March 11th, 12th, and 13th, 1971 at the Fillmore East in New York City. It was released in July of 1971 as a double LP, but sold for the price of a single LP. That was intentional marketing tactic, I guess, by the label. The album started climbing the charts immediately and peaked at number 13 on the Billboard Pop Album charts. It's considered one of the best live albums of all time and was selected for the Library of Congress preservation in 2004. And it is also considered the start of their association with the, quote, jam band label or moniker, even though the band has said that they don't really like that label. This is the only Allman Brothers album we'll talk about, so I'll give a short summary of what happens after this album. Having become successful, many of the band and roadies then became heroin addicts, going dark right out the gate here. 4 of them, Duane, Barry Oakley, and 2 roadies, checked into rehab in October of 1971. On October 29th, Duane Allman was killed in a motorcycle accident at the age of 24, returning to Macon one day after getting out of rehab. The band decided to continue on and released their 4th album, Eat a Peach, on February of 1972. And then November 11, 1972, Barry Oakley crashed his motorcycle into a bus 3 blocks from where Duane died, and he died shortly after, after refusing to go to the hospital after the accident. Then he had to be taken later when he was having cerebral swelling from a fractured skull from the motorcycle accident. The band continued on after that as well, picking up some additional band members and continuing to have drug problems and making money and spending money recklessly. The band broke up in 1976 after an incident involving Greg Allman testifying in court in the trial of a security guy that they knew named Scooter Herring, who was convicted of conspiracy to distribute cocaine, and he was later pardoned by President Carter. So the band basically thought that Greg Allman was snitching by testifying, and then they refused to work with him or talk with him after. They were a very tight-knit band from what I've read, so I guess this was a big betrayal for them. But, money talks, and they had a couple different reunions later on and kind of went back and forth and things. They all had solo careers of the people who still remained, and they carried on in different incarnations. Yeah, incarnations. To the present. Butch Trucks died from a self-inflicted gunshot wound in January of 2017. And Greg Allman died of complications from liver cancer in May of 2017. Dickie Betts is still alive, though, and Jimo is also still alive. So of those original members, that's kind of where everyone was at.
I feel like Josh is really good at informing us of who's passed away, which is always something about covering the 60s and 70s, which is a sad.
Yep.
Yeah. So.
Well,
yeah.
I feel like it's kind of important. I don't want to be morbid or like.
Well, that's what happened, right?
I know.
mean,
yeah. And I don't want to like glorify their deaths or, dying in crazy ways, but it's important to know kind of the history overall.
Wasn't Greg Allman married to Cher?
He dated Cher for a while.
He dated
I don't know
Cher.
If he was married to her. Yeah. They were inducted into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame in 1995. So that's the history of the Allman Brothers in a nutshell. And what did you guys think of at the Fillmore East? Let's start with you, Johnny Jimo.
That's John's new nickname.
Yeah.
Jimo? Is that
Jimo and Baby Driver?
Yeah, there we go. I kind of like it. So, boy, what do I think of this? Trying to figure out how to articulate this. I liked the sound of this album, but it was just too long for a mostly instrumental album. Pretty much actually all instrumental album. Go ahead, Josh. I'm sorry.
I was going to say, do you have any sort of relationship with the Allman Brothers band or knowledge of them outside of this album?
I mean, I obviously know all the Allman Brothers hits, and I've never listened to this album in entirety, but I mean, there's stuff from the Allman Brothers I like. But the Allman Brothers, to me, are much more of a singles band in the sense that I want to hear one song by them. Mm-hmm. And when you mention jam bands, they are not a jam band, but they have some of the things that sometimes hurt jam bands with me, in the fact that the songs start to meld together and you get to the 40-minute mark, and then you get to the 60-minute mark, and then you get to the 80-minute mark, and it overstays its welcome a little bit. A good example is the last track, Whipping Post, which is a good song if I could listen to it as sort of 4 different 6-minute songs. Mm-hmm. But at 23:09, following a 13:07 jam, it was just too much of a good thing. And I think that was what kind of wore me out on this album a little bit. If it had stayed in the 4.5-minute Statesboro Blues, Done Somebody Wrong at the beginning of the album, maybe thrown in one long track, like You Had It, You Don't Love Me, but then it comes back with a 5:21. You're like, all right, it's going a little bit long, but I can dig this, different songs. But then, those last 2 songs extended a little bit. I mean, it adds a solid 36.5 minutes to the album, just 2 songs. Yep. And that is where you kind of lose me a little bit. And I understand completely if you are watching this live, and I would probably greatly appreciate it if I was watching it live, but when you're listening to it as in a sterile environment to try to process it a couple of different times, I just did feel like it blended together a little. I mean, the guitar work is exceptional on this album, so I really do want to mention that. But compared to Derek and the Dominoes, where we were getting hit by more songs and the length did not go to supersize, I connected and had lyrics. I just connected a lot more with the Derek and the Dominoes album that actually, I think it was Dwayne Allman, correct, was on. Mm-hmm. And I love that album. This one just felt a little less than that. That's my initial take. But it's a weird one because I did not dislike this album. I just disliked the format of this album, and I disliked the length of this album.
Well, it's an interesting comparison since we're talking about Yes on this episode also, and their long songs compared to these long songs. I think that's something worth talking about. But Matt,
sure. But very different. Yeah.
Yeah. Matt, what did you think about this?
So first of all, John, how do you differentiate this between a jam band? Like if this isn't a jam band, like what makes a jam band, and why does this not fit that for you?
I feel like the guitars are a little heavier here. I feel it's more grounded in Southern rock. But then again, it's that blues guitar to some degree. Mm-hmm. I don't know. I don't know. I don't know. Maybe it is more jam bandy, Matt, than maybe I would classify it as. Yeah.
I feel like any artist who has a 23-minute song is probably a jam band.
I mean, yeah, because I think jam band. I think it's long, right? Long songs, improvisation, is done, and live, that's their thing. And when you say you're thinking of the Allman Brothers as kind of a singles band, I mean, they definitely had some singles like Melissa and
I said I prefer them as a singles
Jessica
band.
Yeah,
you know what I mean. I don't know if I think of them as long form, but I think of them, Ramblin' Man and Jessica, and I prefer them in even these songs as singles, But then it's like I want to hear one song and then be done with it. I think is what I was going for there. Yeah.
No, they're a live band, right? And this album, is the perfect example of that. So it is long, and this would be. I liked it. I think it's a good summer album. This is definitely something I like having on, outside or driving in the car or whatever. I don't mind long or jammy improvisational rock music. Not a huge jam band guy, but I do like it, and I think that there's a lot. These guys are exceptional musicians, and there's a lot of great grooves. It's very bluesy at times, especially the first couple of tracks. But so it doesn't bother me. But this would definitely be much more entertaining watching live. I was just kind of several times listening to this, going, enjoying it while I was listening to it. Kind of along the lines of John, as being like, I like it, but I'm not like, I'm not loving it. But just picturing myself like at a, festival, an outdoor festival, watching somebody do this stuff would be a blast. I would walk away from that show going, holy crap, that was amazing, So I was kind of mixed in it a little bit like that, but this is, it doesn't surprise me that this is the top album for the Allman Brothers, because this is really who they were. This is them at their best. I'm a little surprised. I think, Josh, when you tipped your hand, I'm a little surprised it was at the almost top 100 of all time in Rolling Stone. That seemed a bit. This is barely cracking the top 100 in the 70s, and that makes a little bit more sense to me. I think it's a little bit maybe more properly placed in best ever albums. But yeah, it's harder to listen to this and really understand it because it is so because there are no lyrics. I do agree with John. It's kind of the stuff does kind of blend together, and it clocking in. It's like an hour. It's 7 songs at over almost an hour and 20 minutes, right? So. Right. It's a lot. It kind of takes and so for you to kind of just pay attention to it straight out for that whole time. And really, I don't know, differentiate or really get into different, feelings with it. It's a little hard to do that. Although there are parts in here that are much more upbeat, and some parts that are a little bit slower. So they do bring it down a little bit. Like I think Stormy Monday, they kind of bring it down a little bit. And so so there is that. It's not like a whole like one note throughout the whole thing. So but both the faster, kind of. Or harder blues rock songs and the slower ones, kind of the ones where they're mellowing out a little bit, are both really well done. So I don't think that this is an album for everyone. I think that there's this album and this type of music, I think, definitely has a place for me. Like I said, particularly this is like great summer music, just kind of outside with barbecuing and stuff, and having it almost kind of as background music, because it's great rock and roll, great blues rock, great rock and roll. But at the same time, I didn't love it, and I could see how this would be off-putting for somebody, just because it is long, and it's like, just
Dad, how long's this album last is what I can hear many a child saying across the country.
Yes. Can we listen to something else? Like, it's all this. I could see somebody else that's not really paying a whole lot of it. It's all the same, so and if you don't like the thing that they're doing, it's going to be a harder sell. So
yeah, I'm mixed on this album as well, and kind of fall in line with you guys. I really enjoyed basically the covers of the blues songs that they did. I was like, okay, this is pretty nice. But then when they got to their originals, I guess would be on like the back or the front and back of the second album, that's when it kind of lost me. And that's also kind of when it became more jam band type of sound. Like on You Don't Love Me, at the 7-minute mark is kind of where the slow guitar part comes in, and then at the 9-minute mark it becomes a jam song where they're all doing it. My kind of main issue with this album is that if you don't know the Allman Brothers, does this really like capture what they're about? I feel like I didn't really get their personality from this album beyond just the fact that they play blues music and don't sing that much. I'm not sure like I get why they are so well loved as like a southern rock band, or even why this is such a great live album. I guess compared to like Live at Leeds by The Who, I feel like that is a much more captures a live feel for me than it would be listening to this. Usually, live albums, I mean, you can hear the crowd noise a little bit in this, but there's not a lot of banter with the album and, with the crowd, and I guess it just doesn't rock out enough for a live album feel. That I wrong. I just picture like musicians being up on stage playing music and not and not like getting into it. It's just like they're talented, but they're not really, I don't know what makes them special. I can't tell from this album. Maybe hearing this compared to some of their earlier albums when they're in the studio, that might be a greater feel. I don't really know the Allman Brothers that well. I think I know some of their biggest hits, but I've never heard this album before.
Yeah, I'm sure they're getting into it. Like, these guys are really great musicians, and they're taking off the solos and stuff like that. It's flashy, and some people that's too much noodling. It's too much, show. But they're still super talented and they do it very well. I'm sure they're getting down with this. And I don't know. I feel like, again, I don't know a ton of their stuff. I don't have their albums or whatever. I know some of their singles, and that's the stuff that you'll hear on the radio. But my guess is that this is what they did. They were a blues band that loved jamming and loved performing in front of the crowd. I don't mind that you don't really hear crowd noise. In fact, I think it's that over. I don't like it when there's too much, crowd noise in a live album, like that James Brown album, and even the Who album to a lesser extent was more prominent there. It wasn't overbearing or anything like that, but I don't mind that there's not that all you can hear are some claps. It's almost like you can't tell that this is a live album when they're actually playing it, and I'm fine with that, because as long as the energy is there and they're playing well and doing what they normally do, if the sound's there, that's all I care about.
Yeah, I guess I have issue when it's labeled as like one of the greatest live albums ever, and I'm not sure that is true.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm sure there's other examples. I saw a lot of comparisons to this band to the Grateful Dead, for obvious reasons, kind of the same love of music, the love of live, performing live and being spontaneous. So I can definitely see that comparison. Did you guys notice In Memory of Elizabeth Reed how much it like sounded like Santana?
For sure. I actually think they share quite a bit in common with Santana, to be quite honest. That's actually an album, especially Braxis by Santana. When we covered that, there were similarities to that for me. I think that might be why I hesitated to call them a full-out jam band, just knowing their singles, but also knowing their connection to Eric Clapton, the similarities I saw with Santana. They delve into a lot of different areas for me. I think Matt really nailed it, though. At their heart, they're a live band, and that's why this is the most representative album of theirs. And I think that did a great job of explaining both this album and also what I was going for. That you almost have to hear them live to appreciate them.
Do you think you could, I mean, on a broader point, do you think you can ever actually capture the experience of seeing a band live on an album?
Well,
I'm not sure if you can, thinking about all the music that we've seen together and other, experiences that we've had.
Well, we're going to cover Yes, and Yes pretty famously tried to do that with a triple album called Yes Songs that comes along later, partially because they didn't feel you could capture their experience. Live at Leeds was kind of an attempt to get the Who. In like 2 months, we're going to cover Alive by Kiss, which launched them as a band. It's probably their most well-regarded album, with the idea that it was supposed to be what it was like to be at a Kiss show. And there's been, I feel that, MTV Unplugged by Nirvana was an attempt to kind of jump in. You know what I'm saying? There's ones where you kind of get a certain type of feel, but no, I don't think you can ever capture a band on live. Because look at what happened with James Brown when we tried to cover him, and he's largely considered one of the greatest live performers of all time.
Yeah, no, I think that one of the reasons, because yes, if you listen to the Allman Brothers studio albums, they're going to have shorter songs. They're going to have more singles. All jam bands do. The Dead had that. Fish has that. You do a studio album with a different mindset than you do with a live album. The thing that live albums allowed these bands to do is produce the songs in a way that they are really the best examples of their song craft or song playing, right? Their musicianship is going to come through on a live album, because that's where they're at their top. That's where they're playing off of the audience, and that's where they're going to, put their all into it, and you're going to get the overall experience. Now, is it the same? Can you actually capture a live experience? No, you can't. You go to a live show, it's totally different, right? It's a completely different scene.
Some do a decent job though, Matt. I think of like "Kick Out the Jams" by the MC5. And you listen to that song live and you're like, whoa, that would be a hell of a show to be at. And while it's not the same, I felt there are some times when you can get that feel.
Yeah, you can get a feel like, oh, maybe this is what it would be like. Or I would, like I just said with this record, just picturing being at a festival, like I think that would be a fun thing. Right. But did I really experience it? No, I didn't. You can't unless you're actually there. But you're probably right, John. Like if there's things where you put yourself into that. I guess I did that with James Brown as well. It's just that his was so much more of a showmanship kind of a thing, putting the jacket on and doing the dancing and stuff. But the Who live at Leeds, like they're probably going, you can't really listen to that and really appreciate what Keith Moon is doing, because part of it for him, his like scene. Watching him play is nuts. Or Townsend doing the windmill or jumping up and down. You're never going to get that. Even so, but it gives them the opportunity to produce the songs in the best way possible that they do live. And that's one of the benefits of having that live album. And, there's no way that this record would be a studio album, right? They're not going to do a 22-minute jam on Whipping Post in the studio. It's just not going to happen, So they have to put it on do the live version to really capture what they're going for.
Yep.
Mm-hmm. Good succinct description there, Matt. I think that really does cover it.
He answered the question about live albums.
I'm the live album guru.
Yeah.
At least on this show.
Some of this album reminded me of like watching Roadhouse and the band's playing there. I imagine.
Oh God, yeah.
behind the chicken wire.
Hopefully nobody's getting their throat ripped out.
Yeah. Hopefully not.
Is we haven't gotten a lot into Southern rock so far either, and this is sort of a delve a little bit into that Southern rock sound, isn't it? That, would continue with Leonard Skinner and Molly Hatchet and bands like that all through the 70s. And we're going to cover a little bit of that. But probably that will also be undercovered, I'd say, in our journey a little bit, outside the cold list and hot takes. So I'll be interested as we move along the 70s, because Southern rock is such a huge staple of the genre in the 70s, to kind of piece that together as well.
Yeah, Skinner's right now at 105 in the 1970s on Best Ever Albums with their best, highest ranked albums. So
we'll cover them in Cold List and Hot Take though.
Okay, yeah. We're not, probably not a whole huge representation.
Mm-hmm. So mixed takes or different takes on this album from us, but listen for yourself and be the judge.
Absolutely, and if we'll eventually talk about bands like I said before, Molly Hatchet, Leonard Skinner, 38 Special comes to mind, right? ZZ Top, Stevie Ray Vaughan, any other ones? Well, not all in this tradition. Yeah,
they're from the South,
right? So I was just thinking of a band from Georgia.
They are not in this. They are not in this tradition. Let's put it that way. B-52s. Yeah. Oh boy! All right, we've gone off.